Hey everyone, welcome to Careers Out There. I'm Mark Luber, and I recently sat down with Ken Ballen. He's the author of this great new book, Terrorism, The Real Lives of Islamic Radicals. Ken's a former federal prosecutor and congressional investigator who served on the Iran-Contra Committee, helping to handle with those Iran-Contra hearings, and served on several other congressional committees as well. In writing this book, Ken traveled overseas to Saudi Arabia and Pakistan, and he sat down with over 100 terrorists to interview them in depth and get to learn what makes them tick. It's a really interesting book. He's a really interesting guy, and we sat down recently and had a great discussion. Here's a look at how that went. Here it is, Terrorism, The Real Lives of Islamic Radicals. And Ken, you interviewed 100 different terrorists and focused on the experiences of 6 of them in the book. I've read through 3 of them now, and it's really fascinating. What I found most interesting is that each of them took a different path to becoming a jihadi. What I'm really curious about is, of the 100 people you interviewed, what commonalities did you find?
Well, everybody's story is different because every person is different, and that includes terrorists too. So there's no one model that or one size that fits all. But among the terrorists, you do find certain commonalities. And the book is called Terrorism. Why? Because for many of them, there's a missed love in their life. There's a missed human connection. And the only love they can find is really to God. There's a story in the book of Abby and Miriam, kind of a jihadi Romeo and Juliet, who love is forbidden inside Saudi Arabia, and he doesn't have the money, the bride price, or dowry to marry her. So he goes off to fight in jihad. Why? Because in jihad he can die in a holy war, go to heaven, and in heaven he can marry whomever he wants. That includes his sweetheart Miriam. There's another story of Ahmad, who's fights in Iraq and goes on a suicide mission and survives and goes to Abu Ghraib, of all places, where he's treated with kindness and respect by Americans, and he becomes very pro-American in the process. So everyone's path to jihad and away from it is different.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And that story was so sad with the guy. He was totally burned to a crisp, and he survived.
He was burned to a crisp. His body was totally mutilated. And he went to Iraq. One of the reasons he went to, because he saw the photos of Abu Ghraib, where everybody was scandalized by. So when he was going there, he was absolutely frightened to death, but yet he was treated with kindness and respect. He received over 30 operations. He met a nurse, an American Army medic. It was the first woman he had ever met outside his own family. And he was transformed. He saw Americans no longer as the enemy, as the infidels to be killed, but as fellow human beings deserving of respect. As he said to me, he said, Al-Qaeda, who I went to fight for, used me like a piece of rotten meat. The Americans I went to fight against treated me with kindness and respect. And as I said, he was transformed. He became quite pro-American in his heart.
And that was really interesting to me. I saw there were a couple characters in the book, or a couple people who you sat down with, who actually found this sense of disillusionment the closer they got to the leaders of both the religious and terrorist organizations. And
right.
So I'm wondering what you learned from that, and what could our government learn from that?
Well, I think that's a kind of a subtext or a theme in the book, is that many people turned away. Many of the people who join the jihad are idealistic young men between the ages of 16 and 28. And they're going because they think they're doing the right thing. Almost as if, I know this may sound controversial, almost as if, somebody in the United States might join the Marines to fight for their country. They think they're doing the right thing. Whether they are or not is a different matter. But that's what they believe. So when they discover that their leaders are manipulating them or lying to them or duplicitous or engaged in corrupt activities, it disillusions many, and many turn away from the cause for that reason. And this is a missed opportunity we have, because we don't expose that here. We don't push that line very much. And we've responded by engaging in military action, which may be necessary, but it's not sufficient.
And doesn't that military action actually just flame the fires? It just...
It can. A couple of months ago, earlier this year in September, we killed in a drone strike, the United States, Anwar al-Awlaki, a Yemeni cleric who's actually an American citizen. I don't know whether that was the right thing to do or not, but I think would have had a greater impact on the cause if we publicized the fact that he had been arrested 3 times in San Diego when he was here in the United States for soliciting prostitutes, even pled guilty to that in open court. Had his followers and other members of al-Qaeda known about that, that might have done more damage to the cause than simply killing him and making him a martyr.
Wow. Would you say that many of the people are against the U.S. because we don't have the same strict view of we not only aren't an Islamic country, but we don't have the same strict view of the religion that they have? Was it largely that, or is it more our foreign policy and our military action over the past?
I don't think, again, one size doesn't fit all. I think if you read the book, it gives the intimate life stories of 6 people, what drove them. And those are complex factors, and they're not always what you think. As I said, one guy goes and fights in jihad because he wants to go to heaven. That's nothing you can do in American foreign policy about that. But in terms of people's impression and opinion of the United States, it is largely shaped by our foreign policy and less by our society.
What about the guy who there's a person that you interviewed?
Character.
And this guy, he was a big character actually. He was like a Donald Trump type. He was a bigwig in Pakistan, and told a lot of great information about Pakistan. A lot of stuff that most of us learned only upon the capture of Osama bin Laden. What was going on there as far as the corruption? What did you learn from him, and what can we do foreign policy-wise there?
Well, Mark, you raise a very interesting point. This person told me in 2008 where in Pakistan bin Laden was hiding and that he was protected by the ISI, which is the Pakistani Army Secret Intelligence. And just so your viewers and listeners are aware of this fact, I was in communication with American intelligence officials.
That's my next question is, what did he do with that information?
I was definitely in communication. Now, he didn't give me an exact street address for bin Laden, but he certainly had the location pretty well nailed down, and he said that the ISI was harboring him there. And this is a man who was paid by the ISI to train terrorist and Taliban fighters to fight against the United States. So as he said to me, Ken, you Americans are literally funding both sides in the war on terror because you're paying for your young men and women to fight in Afghanistan. Meanwhile, you've given $20 billion to the Pakistani government, and they're paying me to train the Taliban. They're paying me to smuggle arms to the Taliban to fight against you. So it's not a metaphorical thing. You are literally funding both sides in the war on terror. And his information checked out. In fact, we found bin Laden.
Right, but what do we do now at Pakistan? It seems to be a huge problem because we are doing both sides and we're kind of trapped.
I don't have the answer to that. I can tell you what this person said to me. He said after being a lifetime career terrorist for Islam, in his words, he said that many in the Pakistani government were motivated. Some were motivated by religious extremism, but others were motivated by the fact that by supporting both sides, they could keep the American funds flowing. And his solution was just simply to cut them off and that you get their attention. That's a risky strategy, however, because they do have nuclear weapons. They are the only Muslim country with nuclear weapons. And to cut them off entirely, I think, would be risky. But I don't have an answer. It's perhaps the number one foreign policy challenge we face. Imagine this scenario. Do this kind of mind game. Suppose after 9/11, Iran was harboring Osama bin Laden. Iran was harboring the Taliban. Iran, which borders Afghanistan, was letting the Taliban be based inside their country and al-Qaeda based inside the country. Do you think we would have waited long before attacking Iran? I don't think so. And yet, that's exactly what happened with Pakistan, and we gave them $20 billion.
It's a mess. It's a mess.
There's no easy answers, though, and I think in many ways Pakistan presents the number one foreign policy challenge to the United States over the next decade. And certainly in terms of extremism, it does. It is the fulcrum now of where extremism is coming from in the world.
It's very scary stuff. I want to get to the human interest element because I'm very curious to know what it's like to sit down with terrorists. But before we get to that, I want to read a little piece. This is from page 297, I thought it was really interesting. It had to do with the polling that you've done overseas. You said, one finding in my nonprofit group's poll of Saudi Arabia kept coming back to me. The highest priority Saudis had for their country were a free press, elections, freedom of speech. In other words, democracy. Yet the policy of the United States that Saudis hated the most, even beyond what they viewed as unconditional support for Israel, was America trying to promote its own vision of democracy in the Middle East. Talk about that.
I think that's absolutely right. That is the crux of the problem. It's not that people don't respect our values or dislike the United States. It's they want to find their own way. And when they feel that the United States is imposing our values on them, that's when they rebel against it, if you will. So I think that's an important lesson that we all have to keep in mind. We should have a foreign policy. Actually, President Bush said it when he was running for president in 2000, not what happened, that we should have a humbler foreign policy, a policy where we engage in dialogue, where we talk, where we defend ourselves when necessary, of course. But we actually have to make sure that people determine their own future, and that whether that's to our liking or not. For suppose in Afghanistan, people, women have been treated as second-class citizens. But that's up to the people of Afghanistan to decide that, not up to the United States to impose our values on people, because that's what causes so much of the tension.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. We do have a way of imposing our values.
We do, because we like our values, and, it's not that other people in the world don't like our values too. They do. That's the irony of it, as you saw in that poll. They respect America. They respect our values, but we have to lead by example and not by words.
Right.
We have to show our values. We have to have our economy successful. We have to have our values successful. We have to show the world, not tell the world.
Right. And just like there's a huge libertarian streak in America where people don't like to be told what to do.
Well, I think nobody likes to be told what to do.
Yeah.
So, and I think everyone has a certain pride in their own culture and their own religion, their own heritage, and we have to respect that. And even if it doesn't coincide with all of our values, lead by example, not by words.
That makes perfect sense. Definitely. Hanging out with terrorists. You're sitting down with someone right across the table who you know has killed a lot of people, who you know wants to kill Americans. You're Jewish. They want to kill Jews. What's going through your mind at that moment, and how can you enjoy your food?
I enjoy my food no matter what, so that's never a problem. Look, I've spent almost 2 decades interviewing all kinds of bad guys, so I'm used to it. I find the human in everyone. And by finding the human in everyone, I'm able to connect. And I had incredible stories and incredible experiences. I didn't set out to write this book, but the experiences and the stories that I gathered were so compelling. They changed everything I thought I knew, who's done this for a living. So I just was completely transformed by these experiences. And it's amazing what you can learn by just listening.
Oh, yeah, definitely. And you really conveyed it well into the book. I mean, it really humanized each person to the point where I found several of them likable. And
well, so they are likable, and that's just the point. Some are victims, and even the ones, the one guy we talked about earlier, the Pakistan, who was a career terrorist and worked for the secret intelligence, he was less likable. But even he, on some level, because he felt so much remorse for what he had done, had a certain amount of, you could feel some compassion for his situation. But by feeling that compassion, by understanding how they think, it doesn't mean you agree with them. It doesn't even mean you like them. But it means by understanding them, you can respond more effectively. I think that's the bottom line.
Right. The sexual repression, you said that the one guy, I'm blanking on his name, had just met his first woman when it was the nurse taking care of him after he'd been fried to a crisp. Right.
He had never met a woman before in his life, outside his own family, of course. And the one who fell in love in Saudi Arabia, the jihadi Romeo and Juliet, he was denied his love. He couldn't have his love. This is a common theme. There was a young man in Pakistan. When he was 11 years old, he was raped by the headmaster of his school, which is a horribly humiliating experience for anyone, and particularly in that culture. It's just devastating. And several years later, he fell in love with a young woman from afar, and he was humiliated again as a result of this. And the only place he could turn to was religion for solace. So he became more and more fundamentalist, which really in that part of world means turning more and more radical, because he wanted to be a good Muslim and he would do whatever it took to be a good Muslim. It didn't matter. Whatever it took, he would do it. So this is how they go down this path. So the sexual repression, the culture plays a huge part in this.
And that's all part of the religion. It's not just like a cultural thing. It's part of the religious code.
It's hard to disentangle. I think it's, in many ways, it's cultural more than religious. But they two, you grow up in a culture where religion is very important, and the two work together.
Interesting. All right. So Ken, tell us this. I'm holding it up again here, Terrorists in Love. What do you want the American people to take away from this book, and what do you want the book to achieve?
The book, Mark, the thing about this book is two people can read it and come to very different conclusions, because I tell the stories of these jihadi terrorists from their own point of view. By telling the stories from their own point of view, people can get into their souls in ways that they come up with their own conclusions. And that's the beauty of this book. It doesn't, just like I say the United States shouldn't tell other people what to do, I'm not going to tell other people what to think. Read their lives for themselves. Get into their hearts. Get into their minds. Know what motivates them. And then you can come up with your own answers, your own point of view, in a way that we can't. Now we're just reacting as a country. 10 years after 9/11, we're still busy reacting. It's time we understand, because before we react, if we understand, then we can be much more effective than we've been, and much less militaristic to achieve our goals too.
I like that. All right, you guys should check out the book. I'll hold it up again here. Terrorists in Love, The Real Lives of Islamic Radicals. Excellent job with this, Ken. Really good. Really good.
Thank you very much.